Shall the world go to shall the world go to hell, or shall I not have my tea? I say let the world go to hell, but I should always have my tea. Do you know that or not? Well, and I do know that I'm a blackguard, a scoundrel, a self-lover, a lazybones. I spent these past 3 days trembling for fear you might come. And do you know what particularly bothered me all these 3 days? That I had presented myself to you as such a hero then, and now you'd suddenly see me in this torn old dressing gown, abject, vile. I just told you I was not ashamed of my poverty. Know, then, that I am ashamed. I'm ashamed of it most of all, afraid of it more than anything, more than of being a thief, because I'm so vain it's as if I'd been flayed and the very air hurts me. But can you possibly not have realized even now that I will never forgive you for having found me in this wretched dressing gown, as I was hurling myself like a vicious little cur at Apollon? The resurrector, the former hero, flinging himself like a mangy, shaggy mutt at his lackey, who just laughs at him. And those tears a moment ago, which like an ashamed woman I couldn't hold back before you. I will never forgive you. And what I'm confessing to you now, I will also never forgive you. Yes, you alone must answer for all this, because you turned up here, because I'm a scoundrel, because I'm the most vile, the most ridiculous, the most petty, the most stupid, the most envious of all worms on earth, who are in no way better than I, but who, devil knows why, are never embarrassed, while I will just go on being flicked all my life by every nit. That's my trait. Besides, what do I care if you won't understand a word of it? And what? Tell me, what? What do I care about you and whether you're perishing there or not? Do you understand? Now that I've spoken it all out to you, how I'm going to hate you for being here and listening? Because a man speaks out like this only once in his life, and then only in hysterics. What more do you want? Why, after all this, do you still stick there in front of me, tormenting me, refusing to leave? But here a strange circumstance suddenly occurred. I was so used to thinking and imagining everything from books, and to picturing everything in the world to myself as I had devised it beforehand in my dreams, that at first I didn't even understand this strange circumstance. What occurred was this. Liza, whom I had insulted and crushed, understood far more than I imagined. She understood from it all what a woman, if she loves sincerely, always understands before anything else, namely, that I myself was unhappy. The frightened and insulted feeling in her face first gave way to rueful amazement. And when I began calling myself a scoundrel and a blackguard, and my tears poured down, I had spoken the entire tirade in tears, her whole face twisted in a sort of convulsion. She wanted to get up, to stop me, and when I came to the end, she paid no attention to my cries. Why are you here? Why don't you leave? But only to how very hard it must have been for me to speak it all out. Besides, she was so downtrodden, poor thing. She considered herself infinitely beneath me. How could she be angry or offended? She suddenly jumped from her chair on some irrepressible impulse, and all yearning towards me, but still timidly, not daring to move from the spot, stretched out her arms to me. Here my heart, too, turned over in me. Then she suddenly rushed to me, threw her arms about my neck, and burst into tears. I, too, could not help myself, and broke into such sobbing as had never happened to me before. They won't let me. I can't be good. I barely articulated, then went to the sofa, fell face down, and sobbed for a quarter of an hour in real hysterics. She leaned towards me, embraced me, and remained as if frozen in that embrace. But still, the hitch was that the hysterics did have to end, and so I am writing the loathsome truth. Lying prone on the sofa, my face buried hard in the wretched leather cushion, I began little by little, remotely, involuntarily, but irresistibly, to feel that it would be awkward now to raise my head and look straight into Liza's eyes. What was I ashamed of? I don't know, but I was ashamed. It also came into my agitated head that the roles were now finally reversed, that she was now the heroine, and I was the same crushed and humiliated creature as she had been before me that night, 4 days ago. And all this came to me during those minutes when I was still lying prone on the sofa. My God, but can it be that I envied her then? I don't know. To this day, I cannot decide. And then, of course, I was even less able to understand it than now. For without power and tyranny over someone, I really cannot live, but reasoning explains nothing, and consequently there's no point in reasoning. I mastered myself, however, and raised my head. Indeed, I had to raise it sometime. And then I am convinced of it even to this day, precisely because I was ashamed to look at her. Another feeling suddenly kindled and flared up in my heart. The feeling of domination and possession. My eyes gleamed with passion, and I squeezed her hands hard. How I hated her and how drawn I was to her at that moment. One feeling intensified the other. This was almost like revenge. At first, a look as if of perplexity, even as if of fear, came to her face, but only for a moment. She embraced me rapturously and ardently. A quarter of an hour later, I was running up and down my room in furious impatience, going to the screen every other minute and peeking at Liza through the crack. She was sitting on the floor, her head leaning against the bed, and was probably crying. But she wouldn't leave, and that was what irritated me. This time she knew everything. I had given her the final insult, but no use talking about it. She guessed that my burst of passion was precisely revenge, a new humiliation for her, and that to my previous, almost pointless hatred there had now been added a personal, envious hatred of her. I do not insist, by the way, that she understood it all clearly, but on the other hand, she fully understood that I was a loathsome man and, above all, incapable of loving her. I know I shall be told that all this is inconceivable, that it is inconceivable to be as wicked, as stupid as I was. Perhaps it will also be added that it was inconceivable not to love her, or at least not to appreciate her love. But why inconceivable? First, I was no longer able to love because, I repeat, for me to love meant to tyrannize and to preponderize morally. All my life I've been incapable even of picturing any other love. And I've reached the point now of sometimes thinking that love consists precisely in the right, voluntarily granted by the beloved object, to be tyrannized over. In my underground dreams as well, I never pictured love to myself otherwise than as a struggle. For me, it always started from hatred and ended with moral subjugation, and afterwards, I couldn't even picture to myself what to do with the subjugated object. And how is it inconceivable if I had managed to corrupt myself morally, had grown so unaccustomed to living life, that I had dared just before to reproach and shame her for coming to me to hear pathetic words? And I myself never guessed that she had come to me not at all to hear pathetic words, but to love me, because for a woman it is in love that all resurrection, all salvation from ruin of whatever sort, and all regeneration consists, nor can it reveal itself in anything else but this. However, I did not hate her all that much as I was running about my room and peeking behind the screen through a crack. I simply felt it unbearably burdensome that she was there. I wanted her to disappear. I longed for peace. I longed to be left alone in the underground. Living life so crushed me, unaccustomed to it as I was, that it even became difficult for me to breathe. But several more minutes passed and she still did not get up, as if she were oblivious. I was shameless enough to tap softly on the screen to remind her. She suddenly roused herself, started up from her place, and rushed to look for her scarf, her hat, her fur coat, as if to escape from me somewhere. 2 minutes later she came slowly from behind the screen and gave me a heavy look. I grinned spitefully, though forcedly, for decency's sake, and turned away from her look. "Goodbye," she said, making for the door. I suddenly ran to her, seized her hand, opened it, and closed it again. Then I turned at once and quickly sprang away to the opposite corner, so as at least not to see. I was going to lie right now, to write that I did it accidentally, in distraction, at a loss, out of foolishness, but I don't want to lie, and so I'll say directly that I opened her hand and put in it out of malice. The thought of doing it occurred to me while I was running up and down my room and she was sitting behind the screen. But this much I can say with certainty: although I did this cruelty on purpose, it came not from my heart, but from my stupid head. This cruelty was so affected, so much from the head, so purposely contrived, so bookish, that I myself could not bear it even for a minute. First I sprang away to the corner so as not to see. Then in shame and despair I rushed after Liza. I opened the door to the landing and began to listen. "Liza, Liza," I called out to the stairway, but timidly, in a low voice. There was no answer. I thought I could hear her footsteps down below. "Liza," I called more loudly. No answer, but at that moment I heard from below the tight glass outer door to the street creak open heavily and slam tightly shut again. The bang echoed up the stairway. She was gone. I went back to my room, pondering. I felt terribly heavy. I stopped by the table next to the chair on which she had been sitting and stared senselessly before me. About a minute passed. Suddenly I gave a great start. There before me on the table, I saw a crumpled blue 5-ruble bill, the very one I had pressed into her hand a moment before. It was that bill. It couldn't have been any other. There wasn't any other in the house. So she had managed to fling it from her hand onto the table just as I jumped away to the opposite corner. Well then, I could have expected her to do that. Could have expected? No. I was so great an egoist, I had in fact so little respect for people, that I could scarcely imagine she too would do that. I couldn't bear it. A second later I rushed like a madman to get dressed, threw on in a flurry whatever I could find, and raced headlong after her. She couldn't have gone more than 200 steps before I ran out to the street. It was still, and the snow was falling heavily, almost perpendicularly, laying a pillow over the sidewalk and the deserted roadway. Not a single passerby, not a sound to be heard. The street lamps flickered glumly and uselessly. I ran about 200 steps to the intersection and stopped. Where did she go, and why am I running after her? Why? To fall down before her, to weep in repentance, to kiss her feet, to beg forgiveness? I wanted it. My whole breast was tearing apart. And never, never will I recall this moment with indifference. But why, came the thought. Won't I hate her, maybe tomorrow even, precisely for kissing her feet today? Will I bring her happiness? Haven't I learned again today for the 100th time just how much I'm worth? Won't I torment her to death? I stood in the snow, peering into the dull darkness, and thought about that. And won't it be better, yes, better, I fancied later back at home, stifling the living pain in my heart with fantasies. Won't it be better if she now carries an insult away with her forever? An insult, but this is purification. It's the most stinging and painful consciousness. By tomorrow I'd have already dirtied her soul with myself and worn out her heart. But now the insult will never die in her, and however vile the dirt that awaits her, the insult will elevate and purify her through hatred. Maybe also forgiveness, though, by the way, will all that make it any easier for her? And in fact, I'm now asking an idle question of my own. Which is better, cheap happiness or lofty suffering? Well, which is better? Such were my reveries as I sat at home that evening, barely alive from the pain in my soul. Never before had I endured so much suffering and repentance, but could there have been even the slightest doubt as I went running out of the apartment that I would turn back halfway? Never have I met Liza again or heard anything about her. I will also add that for a long time I remained pleased with the phrase about the usefulness of insult and hatred, even though I myself almost became sick then from anguish. Even now, after so many years, all this comes out somehow none too well in my recollection. Many things come out none too well now in my recollections, but shouldn't I just end my notes here? I think it was a mistake to begin writing them. At least I've felt ashamed all the while I've been writing this story. So it's no longer literature, but corrective punishment. Because, for example, to tell long stories of how I defaulted on my life through moral corruption in a corner, through an insufficiency of milieu, through unaccustomed to what is alive, and through vainglorious spite in the underground is not interesting, by God. A novel needs a hero. And here there are purposely collected all the features for an anti-hero, and in the first place, all this will produce a most unpleasant impression because we've all grown unaccustomed to life. We're all lame, each of us more or less. We've even grown so unaccustomed that at times we feel a sort of loathing for real living life, and therefore cannot bear to be reminded of it. For we've reached a point where we regard real living life almost as labor, almost as service. And we all agree in ourselves that it's better from a book. And why do we sometimes fuss about why these caprices, these demands of ours? We ourselves don't know why. It would be the worse for us if our capricious demands were fulfilled. Go on, try giving us more independence, for example. Unbind the hands of any one of us, broaden our range of activity, relax the tutelage, but I assure you, we'll immediately beg to be taken back under tutelage. I know you'll probably get angry with me for that, shout, stamp your feet. Speak just for yourself and your miseries in the underground. Don't go saying we all. Excuse me, gentlemen, but I'm not justifying myself with this allishness. As far as I myself am concerned, I have merely carried to an extreme in my life what you have not dared to carry even halfway. And what's more, you've taken your cowardice for good sense and found comfort in thus deceiving yourselves, so that I, perhaps, come out even more living than you. Take a closer look. We don't even know where the living lives now, or what it is, or what it's called. Leave us to ourselves without a book, and we'll immediately get confused, lost. We won't know what to join, what to hold to, what to love and what to hate, what to respect and what to despise. It's a burden for us even to be men with real, our own bodies and blood. We're ashamed of it. We consider it a disgrace and keep trying to be some unprecedented omni-men. We're stillborn and have long ceased to be born of living fathers, and we like this more and more. We're acquiring a taste for it. Soon, we'll contrive to be born somehow from an idea. But enough. I don't want to write any more from underground. However, the notes of this paradoxalist do not end here. He could not help himself and went on. But it also seems to us that this may be a good place to stop.